Have you ever wondered why the Bible introduces history's most mysterious beings, only to go completely silent 4 verses later? If you have ever looked into the Nephilim, you have likely encountered wild theories about ancient giants and celestial entities. Entire books, late-night debates, and elaborate documentaries have been constructed around these mysterious figures in ancient literature. Yet, when you open the ancient text and read the actual lines, the abruptness of the narrative is deeply jarring. The scripture introduces the most speculated beings in human history, gives them a single sentence, and drops the subject forever. Why would an ancient historical record raise a concept this massive and then maintain absolute, total silence? That silence is not an accidental oversight by the authors. The quietness itself carries the primary message. The text is not hiding a secret truth. Its deliberate restraint is the exact point of the passage. Once you recognize this specific narrative choice, you will never read chapter 6 of Genesis in the same way again. To truly grasp the weight of these ancient lines, we must examine the specific context where they appear. Historical context changes everything, placing us directly at the threshold of the ancient pre-flood world. The preceding chapter walks through a vast genealogy, listing generation after generation living and dying across the early Earth. Humanity was multiplying rapidly across the globe, but something deeply destructive was rising right alongside them. Immediately following the brief mention of these figures, the text reveals what the divine perspective actually focused on. The ancient record states that human wickedness was widespread, and that every intent of the human heart was continually corrupt. This is the heavy environment where these figures briefly appear, right before the ancient world undergoes a massive transformation. The genealogical records establish a slow, rhythmic drumbeat repeating the exact same heavy phrase, "and he died." It serves as a stark reminder that human mortality had become deeply woven into the fabric of reality. By the time the narrative reaches the 6th chapter, the human family has grown ancient, vast, and morally fractured. These enigmatic beings do not appear in a vacuum. They arrive at the lowest point of a long moral decline. Here is what the primary source material actually records regarding their sudden appearance in the ancient world. When population grew and daughters were born, influential figures took spouses from among them according to their choices. This was followed by a decree that human lifespans would henceforth be strictly limited to a specific boundary. Then comes the famous line noting that these renowned individuals existed on the earth during those pivotal early days. Look closely at the text and you will notice something shocking. Almost every detail you grew up believing is completely missing. There is no physical description of their height, no dramatic origin story, and no details about what became of them. The ancient record offers a simple name, a historical setting, and a prominent reputation before instantly moving on. By the very next line, the focus shifts entirely to the state of human grief and the coming reset of the world. These figures receive merely one sentence of spotlight before the narrative camera turns toward a far more urgent matter. What does the ancient linguistic root of the term Nephilim actually mean when analyzed by scholars today? Most language experts connect the word to a root meaning to fall, translating it roughly as the fallen ones. While this is a common interpretation, rigorous linguistic study reveals a high degree of scholarly debate. Historical linguists have debated this specific term for centuries without reaching a singular, unanimous agreement. Some interpret the word as those who cause others to fall, referring to fierce ancient warriors who brought terror. Others suggest alternative language connections, proving that the precise translation remains an open historical question. Anyone telling you the definition of Nephilim is 100% settled is selling you far more confidence than the language supports. Furthermore, the concept of falling can imply moral collapse, defeat in battle, or descending from a higher realm. The single ancient term carries all these potential meanings, yet the text never explicitly chooses one for us. Consider the mental picture most people automatically form when this topic comes up. The idea of towering giants. That popular image is widespread today, but it does not actually originate from this original Genesis text. The original writing never describes these individuals as being physically tall or possessing giant proportions. The idea that Nephilim were physical giants was actually added by translators thousands of years after the text was written. Ancient scholars translating the Hebrew text into Greek selected a word for giants, which influenced later European translations. When you picture a massive creature, you are viewing a translator's choice layered on top of a silent text. Modern artwork and popular myths trace back to translation interpretations rather than the primary ancient wording. Those early translators worked within their own cultural understanding, but translation interpretation is distinct from original text. The primary foundational text remains entirely silent regarding physical dimensions or monstrous physical traits. The gap between what the text actually says and what modern culture assumes it says is exceptionally revealing. The passage does offer one clear historical statement: these offspring came from a specific ancient union. Identifying the parties involved in this ancient union has generated three main historical interpretations over time. The first perspective suggests these figures represent a lineage dedicated to moral integrity, marrying into a corrupt line. The historical record traces two distinct ancestral lines, one pursuing ethical living and the other drifting into corruption. What if the world fell apart not because of invading monsters, but because good people slowly gave up on their values? It suggests human society collapsed through gradual moral compromise rather than external interference. The second perspective proposes that these figures were powerful ancient rulers and warlords, claiming elevated authority. Ancient kings frequently claimed divine heritage in stone inscriptions, seizing whatever power and spouses they desired. Their descendants became famous figures of renown, fitting the theme of widespread societal violence described in the passage. The third main interpretation views these entities as celestial beings who exceeded their designated boundaries. This view was popular among certain early historical commentators who compared the wording to other ancient writings. However, this interpretation introduces complex philosophical questions that the short text never stops to address. Three major interpretations exist, supported by various scholars, yet the original text refuses to pick a winner. The ultimate paradox of Genesis chapter 6 is that the passage which launched 1,000 theories refuses to answer its own question. That absence of detailed explanation is not a missing page, it represents a deliberate narrative boundary. Observe how the narrative moves immediately after mentioning these famous figures of ancient reputation. It does not linger on legendary battles or elaborate ancient lore from the pre-flood epoch. Instead, the narrative zooms in on a deeply moving revelation regarding the creator's internal perspective. The record states that the creator observed the extent of human harm and experienced profound sorrow of heart. The true heart of the chapter is not legendary figures, but deep grief over a world ruined by human hostility. The text acknowledges the famous names of antiquity and promptly refuses to glorify or center them. It denies these prominent figures the main stage, shifting all attention back to moral accountability and divine sorrow. External ancient writings outside the standard historical record struggled with this silence and tried to fill it. During later historical eras, expansive writings were produced that turned 4 short lines into elaborate epics. Other ancient writers couldn't stand the Bible's silence on giants, so they invented massive stories to fill the void. These expanded legends named specific figures, detailed forbidden ancient knowledge, and described mythical beasts. They built a massive cathedral of speculative detail right where the original text left in quiet, open space. While those external books were read in antiquity, mainstream historical communities ultimately excluded them from canonical scripture. They recognized that these expanded sagas were written centuries later under names they did not genuinely belong to. More importantly, these expanded legends subtly shifted the primary blame for human suffering onto external forces. They framed moral collapse as the fault of mythic outsiders rather than the choices of human hearts. The ancient legends let humanity off the hook, but the Bible insists on holding us responsible for our own choices. The foundational text maintains its ground, keeping the moral focus firmly on human actions and divine care. When modern readers encounter this ancient quietness, there is often a strong urge to fill in the blanks. Some create elaborate theories involving hidden codes, secret bloodlines, or conspiratorial speculation. Others attempt to blend ancient texts with modern fantasy, looking for extraordinary alternative explanations. Both approaches make the same error as ancient folklore by refusing to respect the limits of the text. Chasing sensational theories creates a feeling of secret knowledge while distracting from the actual ethical message. The brief nature of the narrative is intentional, inviting us to respect the boundaries of what was recorded. Mystery in historical literature is not always a puzzle to solve. Sometimes it is a lesson in intellectual humility. The same rare term appears only once more in ancient records, during a report by scouts exploring new territory. Overwhelmed by fear, the scouts used the legendary name to describe the formidable physical size of local inhabitants. The historical account frames their report not as objective facts, but as an expression of overwhelming panic. When human beings get terrified, we reach for the biggest, most exaggerated legends to justify our fear. They used the most intimidating traditional word available to explain why they wanted to retreat from their mission. Meanwhile, the main historical narrative remained focused on a single line of faith enduring through adversity. The larger account centers on compassion, preserving a family to bring hope and renewal to a shattered world. That continuous thread of hope carries forward through generations, building toward a broader message of restoration. The ancient record goes quiet about sensational figures because they were never the true focus of the story. Maintaining restraint requires far greater authorial discipline than indulging in endless dramatic embellishment. The ancient scribes who preserved these lines chose to emphasize moral clarity and restoration over sensationalism. Learning to read ancient literature wisely means accepting that some questions were left open on purpose. It encourages readers to focus on clear ethical principles rather than getting lost in endless speculation. Are you willing to sit with an unanswered question, or will you run after loud theories that promise easy answers? Real wisdom comes from recognizing what is essential for living well versus what merely feeds curiosity. Building understanding on core narrative themes provides lasting depth compared to chasing sensational mysteries. When you encounter quiet passages in ancient texts, allow them to stay quiet and respect their structural intent. The original record provided exactly what was necessary to convey its timeless message to future generations. Understanding the intentional design of the text unveils the genuine power of its overarching historical vision. It reminds us that human actions carry profound weight and that integrity matters even in dark times. The narrative structure intentionally protects the reader from being distracted by secondary folklore. By keeping the spotlight on human choices, the text maintains its relevance across thousands of years. Speculation may feel exciting in the moment, but simple truth is what actually sustains thoughtful living. The Bible didn't forget the details about the Nephilim. It intentionally left them out to protect the real story. The deliberate brevity stands as a guardrail against turning historical records into mere entertainment. Every generation faces the choice to seek sensational secrets or focus on meaningful, ethical living. Choosing to honor the text's silence allows its primary message of hope and responsibility to shine clearly. The enduring strength of this ancient passage lies precisely in what it refused to say. As we reflect on these 4 short verses, we gain a deeper appreciation for the discipline of the ancient writers. They left us a text that values truth over drama, inviting us to seek wisdom over mere excitement. Next time you read a quiet passage in ancient scripture, ask yourself, what is the silence trying to teach you? In the end, the quietness of the Nephilim story points us back to what matters most: human heart, responsibility, and hope.